All right, here we are in Chapter 3 on polynomial and rational functions, and this is 3.1 on complex numbers. So first, what is a complex number? Well, square root of a -1. Well, that is a special thing, and we call the square root of -1 equal to I, which is an imaginary number. Now, I squared is equal to the square root of -1 squared, and when you square that, the square root cancels, and we just get -1. So I squared is equal to a -1. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to start coming up with what is a complex number. So what a complex number is it's a sum of a real number and an imaginary number. So we're going to have some real number like maybe a 5, and the sum of it and an imaginary number, say we have 2i, okay? So in standard form, it's going to look like a plus bi, where a is the real part, this is the real part of the complex number, and b is this here part, and that's the imaginary part of the complex number. Now, if a is equal to 0, then we just get the imaginary number, because if you think about that, we get a or 0 plus maybe a 4i. Well, 0 plus 4i, well, that just is equal to 4i, and so we just have that imaginary part only. Okay, so that happens when we have a equals 0. All right, so here we have an example, and based on our a plus bi, well, a here, that's going to be the real part, and b is 2, and that's going to be the imaginary part. So the 5 is the real part, and 2 is the imaginary part. So using numbers, that is our example there. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to express a negative square root of, or square root of -24 in standard form. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, what we have to do is we have to think about the pieces here we have. So what are the pieces? Well, negative square, and under the square we have -24. Well, what we can do is we can say, well, that's really the square root of 24 times the square root of -1. Okay, and so then we have it split apart, and now square root of -1, well, from page 1, that's equal to I. And so then what we can do is say, okay, at that point, now we have the square root of 24 times I. But we can break 24 down, and we can break that into 4 times 6. Now, what we can do is we can break the other part like we did up here. We had the -1 times the 24, and we put a square root of 24 times the square root of -1. So we're going to do the same thing with the square root of 4 and the square root of 6. We're going to take the square root of 4 times the square root of 6 times I. Well, the square root of 4, that's a perfect number. That's a perfect square. So we can say, well, square root of that is just 2. And then we have the square root of 6 still, and then we have I. And so square root of -24 becomes, now if we're putting it in standard form, which is, the complex number, is going to be 0 plus 2i squared of 6. So we're going to kind of rearrange this. We're going to put the I out front here so you don't mistakenly write, the square root of 6i, because that's not equal to I times the square root of 6. So sometimes when you're writing these in mom, you have to be careful that you stop that square root, and if you're going to put it on the end, or you just put that I at the beginning. And so we have 2i square root of 6. Okay. Now we have a complex plane. So what that is we have a horizontal axis is going to be our real axis, the a part of the complex number, and imagine that. And then the vertical axis is going to be the imaginary units. And so what we're going to do, it's just going to be like an xy axis. And again, this is the real part, the a, and this is going to be the imaginary part. And that's going to be, the part with the I. And so, we can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So we could plot anything on here. So if we say we wanted to plot maybe a 3 minus 2i, okay, just for difference, because, we've been looking at all pluses. What if we have a negative? Well, the real part is that's the real part. That is the imaginary part. And so what we do is we go 3 in the positive direction on the real part. So again, it's still going to be minus this way and plus this way, minus this way, plus this way. And so we go 1, 2, 3. And now it says minus 2 here. So we go down 2. And that's going to be our 3 minus 2i. So that's going to be that point there. Okay. And we could plot many, many points on here. You know, we could plot maybe a -2 plus 4i, or a -3 minus 4i, or, you know, a 3 1i, or, you know, just I. So, you know, you can plot anything on this plane. Okay, so let's plot a few. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot both of these on the same plane, so I don't have to draw two. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So here, this is the real part. This is our imaginary part. So we need to go, and again, if you don't remember, that's your A, that's your B part. So we're going to, R is -4. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's a -2 on the I. So we go down 1, 2. So we should be, you know, somewhere in that vicinity, you know, within rules of how I can draw on the graph here. And so that would be our point number 1. So we're just going to say point 1 instead of labeling it -4, -2i. What about this one? Well, here, our real part is positive and our imaginary part is positive. So that means we're going to be up here in the first quadrant. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have to go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so that's going to be roughly there. And that's going to be our point 2. And again, all we have to do is look at our real part and imaginary part. Left and right is going to be the real. Up and down is going to be our imaginary. So you could plot any kind of points here, and it's gonna work well. And you could think of it as it's going to be, if you need to, you know, it's going to be your A, comma, your B. Okay, that's what it is, because that's your X and your Y, and this is your X-axis, that's your Y-axis. But now we're calling it A and B, and so however you want to look at it, that's how it's going to work. Okay. All right, let's pause there, and we'll come back with more.